So basically, like, what's going on at Polygon? Like, you've been, I guess, working on Polygon 2.0. Like, what is Polygon 2.0? What makes sense? Like, why did Polygon went this way? And how do you compare the solution you're developing versus, like, I don't know, like other stacks available?
Yeah. So the way that I like to kind of frame when people ask this question is like almost like a before and after of what Polygon and Matic originally was kind of created for, and the reasoning behind that to how the space has progressed over time to lead us to kind of where we are today. So most people think of Polygon and think of the Polygon chain, right? Which is our like bread and butter, our proof of stake chain that has had some of those huge collaborations with the biggest companies in the world, like creating these Web3 experiences on the proof of stake chain. And really, the mission with that chain was to say people like to use Ethereum. Ethereum has a lot of strong points in terms of decentralization and security, but it's too expensive for people to use, and it's too slow for people to use in about 99% of use cases, right? So it's too expensive and too slow. And the Polygon proof of stake chain kind of said, okay, there's also, at the time, there was also like the environmental impact of the proof of work consensus mechanism. So a combination of things kind of led to this innovation of Polygon proof of stake chain, which at the time was essentially to say, you can use exactly the same tools on Ethereum, you can build with the same smart contract languages, and all of the developer experience and the user experience is going to be the same based on the EVM. We're just going to kind of say, hey, let's use this proof of stake model. We'll also kind of use this delegated proof of stake to make it even more scalable and really focus on the scalability aspect instead of emphasizing the other two pillars as heavily. So you kind of get a nice balance of decentralization, security, and then a huge increase in scalability. So then that was really where it was when it was created. And then over time, as some of you, I'm sure, listening will already know, Polygon now has more than one chain and multiple different products to kind of supplement the proof of stake chain, which is still running today. So what it is today is we have our own ZK EVM, which is the zero knowledge rollup layer 2 built on Ethereum. So the difference there is where right now Polygon proof of stake is essentially what a lot of people consider a side chain or a commit chain. It's the ZK EVM is built on top of Ethereum, where it posts all of the transaction data back down to Ethereum and inherits a lot of the security properties through that whole data being posted back to Ethereum, or soon to be blobs, I guess I should say. And then following the ZK EVM, I guess the kind of logic was to say, well, we built this thing and it's all open source. Like you can see all of the implementation details. We're kind of innovating this thing in public. Why don't we make another tool to kind of supplement this to say, well, other people also want their own dedicated block space. They also want to have customized rules in their own chains, or to just launch a chain to support their business or whatever needs they have to create their own chain. Why don't we make it a process that you can actually kind of take the ZK EVM, make any customizations to any aspect of it, like the prover, the data availability layer, whatever you want to change. And we built the chain development kit, or the CDK, which is kind of what we're focusing on now, is to say, we built the ZK EVM, why don't we just make all of it open source and kind of package it together in a customizable modular way so that other people can launch their own chains. And we've seen that with projects like OKX or A-Star and a lot of other different projects, to say, okay, well, we have the ZK EVM, they've changed some aspects to it and launched their own L2 that is almost a fork or some variation of the ZK EVM. And a lot of different L2s are kind of spinning up with this CDK. I know I've kind of rambled a lot to kind of give you the history, but the final piece of that is the AggLayer, which is kind of tying all of these L2s that are launching not only with the CDK, but in the broader ecosystem, and kind of tying them together in a way where you can access the different users across different chains, access the different liquidity across different chains, and making, rather than having a lot of individual L2s, making a kind of more unified experience to say, hey, like, well, we're all really doing the same thing at the end of the day. We're building decentralized experiences. It makes sense for us to be able to access and tap into the different communities and the different liquidity across these L2s.
Cette vidéo vous est présentée en partenariat avec DYDX. DYDX est LA solution décentralisée qui vous permet de trader les principales crypto-monnaies de manière liquide sur mobile et ordinateur. Contrairement à la majorité des exchanges, vous n'avez pas besoin de vous KYC et vous récupérez la majorité des frais que vous payez. Plus de 60 000 personnes utilisent déjà DYDX et j'en fais partie, alors qu'attendez-vous? Scannez le QR code sur votre écran ou utilisez le lien dans la description pour créer votre compte avec un simple wallet et profitez de 5% de réduction sur vos frais. Allez, on repart sur l'interview.
Great. So if I had to sum up, so basically Polygon went to like a side chain, which was based on proof of stake, then created its own ZK EVM, like basically an L2 on Ethereum, then built the CDK, which helps like anyone to create its own ZK EVM chain, or layer 2 at least, and customize everything so that it can like build their own one and basically define the parameters they're interested in. And then basically you invented the AggLayer, which is like a layer that helps like any chain using the Polygon CDK to tap in the liquidity of like the Polygon ecosystem. So personally, that is like the biggest part and in the part I'm the most excited about, because basically you could have like 10 layer 2s, but having the same shared liquidity. So you don't have to like bring people and make sure there is enough liquidity so you could like, I don't know, trade, exchange, swap, or whatever. You could just like enjoy it and basically use the liquidity from like any layer 2 of the Polygon ecosystem because you're tapping the AggLayer. But like, is the AggLayer live already? And if not, like when? If yes, like what are the insights so far?
Yeah. So the summary there, you nailed it. So I'm glad at least my rambling was correct. But one small correction I will make is kind of the vision of the AggLayer is not just specific to Polygon CDK chains. So kind of treating it as like a public good almost that obviously Polygon's team is kind of the main contributor towards, but there'll also be or there also are and will be more contributors to this kind of open source public good that anyone can kind of permissionlessly tap into. So if I wanted to launch an optimistic L2 in the future, we're kind of saying, well, you know, if you want to access all of the people who have also opted into the AggLayer and access their liquidity and access their communities, you'll be able to kind of permissionlessly tap into that without, you know, having to contact Polygon directly and say, hey, how do I get involved in this? So it's not just well, the idea is it's not just going to be limited to Polygon CDK chains. So to answer the question, is the AggLayer live? The answer is yes. The AggLayer is live in its first iteration. So the release of the AggLayer is going to come in multiple different phases, and each phase is obviously going to be better than the last and kind of have more features than the previous version. I think we have 2 or 3, at least at the time we're recording this, of the Polygon CDK chains opted into the AggLayer. I think 2 are public and 1 I don't think I can say right now. But
I'm trying to get some alpha. I'm doing my best.
Yeah, so essentially the plan is we'll have obviously our Polygon chain. So we have the Polygon ZK EVM is going to opt into the AggLayer. And I think that's going to be a big push for some of initially the Polygon CDK chains. And then later on will be a kind of incentive to opt in for other different chains outside of that community, because I think there's 100 or 150 mil TVL on the Polygon ZK EVM and obviously a bunch of users. And then later on down the line, when the proof of stake chain also converts to a ZK powered layer 2, that's going to have a huge incentive for others to kind of say, hey, I want to tap into all of those Polygon users and access that liquidity. So those are going to be 2. Then we'll have, I think the 2 that I've already mentioned in the Polygon CDK community right now is A-Star and I believe OKX is going to opt into the AggLayer as well. So those will be the first two publicly announced. So there's maybe some alpha in there. And then, yeah, like you said, the plan is to have essentially anyone who wants to access the interoperability between these chains will be able to opt into the AggLayer. And then more broadly, this will spread out into the different ecosystems outside of the Polygon CDK community as well.
So the AggLayer is not like enabled by default for like the Polygon like CDK chains, I would say, or layer twos. Like you have to, I don't know, like define a parameter and say yes, or like do you have like some like more complexity and other things to set up to make it happen?
Yeah, so I believe the default is not to opt into the AggLayer. If you're just spinning up like a CDK chain, so like for example, I've been playing around like launching some test nets and things like that with the CDK, and it's not sending the proofs back to the AggLayer. So the default behavior is just sending it straight to Ethereum, and then the way that the mental model that I kind of have is to say you're just switching like one thing or one component or one aspect of the L2 that you're creating when you opt into the AggLayer, right? So instead of sending the proofs directly to Ethereum, the mental model that I have is you're kind of sending it to this middle layer in between, which is the AggLayer, right? So instead of ZK AVM, A-Star, OKX, whatever other L2s have opted into the AggLayer, all kind of individually sending them back to Ethereum. The goal, which is not the first iteration of the AggLayer right now, will be a future iteration, is to say all of these L2s will send them to this middle layer. They'll be aggregated into a single proof, which is kind of, I guess, where the name comes from, and then sent to Ethereum directly. So it'll kind of like combine all of the different chains that have opted in into one single proof that then is getting sent to Ethereum. So in my mind, the answer is no, it's not the default behavior currently, but to do it is just kind of swapping the behavior of one component of the chain that you're creating.
And so what is interesting is that you keep the native assets between like all those layer twos, like opting fun for the AggLayer. So basically, you always have like the native assets, not about like wrapping the assets or whatever, right?
Sorry, would you be able to clarify the question for me? Sorry.
So whenever like you like enjoy the liquidity of like the AggLayer, like on Polygon CDK chains or other ones, so you benefit from like you keep the native assets whenever you use this liquidity. It's not about like wrapping tokens or whatever. Like it's always like native tokens, right?
Yeah. So I think it's an interesting question because
Or
each L2
maybe
can
I'm
have its own
confused
native
about
token.
it, and I don't know.
Yeah. I think I get what you're saying. So maybe I can talk about it. So
Yeah.
essentially, like it is interesting because each L2 can have its own native token. It doesn't have to be ETH. So the process then is kind of like, well, do you have some middleman kind of deciding the value of the two tokens if you want to do a swap? And then I guess it does get a little complex between two chains that don't share the same native token. But from my understanding, like the current implementation is essentially to say, well, I can combine this bridge and call function into a single interaction, essentially. So, for example, if I wanted to interact with a smart contract on a different chain that is opted into the AggLayer, I can currently call this like bridge and call function to say, okay, well, I guess the name is kind of self-explanatory. I want to bridge and then call this function on a different smart contract, and you're paying the fee upfront to perform both of those operations. And then the kind of later iterations, the model that I have in my head is to say, okay, the multiple different transactions that I want to occur on chain A or chain B or chain C, et cetera, I create a bundle, and these are called like atomic transactions. Atomic meaning I want either all of them to succeed or I want none of them to succeed. And the example that I use in one of my videos is, for example, like cross-chain swapping or cross-chain arbitrage or swapping of tokens across different chains. obviously you really want all of these to succeed, or if half of them succeed, something's gone seriously wrong, right? Because you can't have like a buy transaction go through on one chain and then a sell transaction not go through, and you just end up with this really awkward situation, or the reverse, where the buy doesn't go through but the sell does go through, and you've just kind of printed money out of thin air. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, like to access the liquidity, it depends on like the situation or the exact thing that you're trying to do, but yeah, the current implementation is that you're able to just simply call smart contract functions across different chains that have opted in.
If you had to compare the AggLayer to other solutions available on the market, like what would be those solutions? Like to which like projects, protocols, like solution is the AggLayer comparing to?
Yeah, so I think the one that comes to mind is shared sequences. So shared sequencer like Espresso, for example. And the comparison here is essentially they're trying to achieve the same thing, which is interoperability between chains. And maybe I'll just give like a brief explanation of sequences to some of the listeners who are not as in the depths of like how L2s work, I guess. But a sequencer is essentially like the most important part of your L2 chain. It's how you process all of the transactions back to the L1. It's also, if your sequencer goes down, your chain is essentially not working. So it can't process transactions and it can't send data back to wherever you're sending data back to, most commonly Ethereum. So if the sequencer goes down, you're in a lot of trouble. The shared sequencer system is basically saying, well, currently Optimism has their own sequencer, Polygon ZK EVM has their own sequencer, Arbitrum has their own sequencer. Every single L2 has their own individual sequencer that doesn't communicate with each other, despite a lot of them often just doing the exact same thing across different L2s. So something like Espresso is saying, what if each of these different chains opted in to use the same sequencer? And then as part of that, you could then kind of have this central meeting point of all of these transactions and achieve this interoperability between the chains that are using the same sequencer. So for example, you could do the stuff that I was talking about before, where you could have cross-chain swaps, where let's say I send a transaction from Optimism, I send a transaction from Arbitrum. They both go to the same shared sequencer, and that shared sequencer kind of is able to handle, since it has visibility from both of these chains and is ultimately responsible for executing them and sending them back to Ethereum as well, it can therefore facilitate these cross-chain interactions. So I think that's the most comparable. The difference between a shared sequencing system and the AggLayer, in my mind, is what we're calling sovereignty. So sovereignty was kind of a confusing word to me, to be honest, but what it means is, as Polygon, for example, we really care about the experience that users have, and we want to make sure the sequencer is kind of a top quality. And every other chain has that same feeling, right? It's like we want, at least currently, I think every single L2 has a centralized sequencer, except maybe there are some exceptions to that I'm not aware of. But most L2s, they really care about having control of the sequencer. And control is a scary word to use, but essentially what I mean by that is, if the sequencer is not working to the standard that you expect, your chain is not operating to the standard that you expect. And if there's downtime, or if there's performance optimizations that you want to make, or in some like business perspectives, if there's some profit that you want to take from the sequencer fees, then with a shared sequencer, you can't really do that, because you're having to hand over control of your sequencer to another party, essentially, right? For example, Espresso, you would say, okay, I'm not going to run my own sequencer. I'm going to opt in to use this shared sequencer that Espresso is running. And within that process, you're essentially saying, okay, I'm going to hand over the performance, the control's a weird word to use in Web3, but I think it kind of makes sense in this context. I'm going to hand all of that over to another system that I can't really improve. I don't have as much visibility. I don't have as much control over. I'm not able to customize any of the behaviors of that thing. So essentially, it's like you're giving away a lot of the control that a chain has by opting into a shared sequencer. So AggLayer, it's trying to solve the same problems where you have interoperability between L2 chains, and you can do these things like cross-chain transactions, but you still run your own sequencer. Each chain still has their own sequencer. It's just sending these proofs to a different place other than Ethereum. So from like a business perspective and from I guess a lot of different perspectives, it's like beneficial for you to have the sequencer in your hands, and then you still get the benefits of the interoperability.
So like, does Arbitrum or Optimism could use like the AggLayer, or like it doesn't make any sense, or is it not possible?
Yeah, so my understanding is yes, in the future, like anyone will be able to permissionlessly opt in to use the AggLayer. I don't think it's right, like there right now that anyone can come in and say, I'm just going to flick the switch and swap into the AggLayer currently. And then I guess like later down the track, does the OP collective like want to opt into the AggLayer? We'll see how that plays out. But the vision is like, yeah, anyone will be able to come in with their L2 and say, yes, I want to access these interoperability benefits, therefore I'm going to opt into the AggLayer. I don't think it's there like that freely at the current iteration, but that is the goal.
But like, does Arbitrum like in Optimism are trying to do the same with Arbitrum in OP Stack, or like it's not the case at all? Like I'm trying to map like what are the solutions like that are quite similar to it, because like this is quite very new to me, and this is like I would say a new narrative in a way. I mean, interoperability has been like a word that has been used like for a very long time, but now it does feels like more real in a way. So yeah, could you maybe explain a bit like if other like big L2s are having the same approach with their CDK or stack solution?
Yeah, I think they are. So I think and L1s as well, like for example, Avalanche or AVAX. I'm not going to pretend like I know as much as I do about as Polygon with these chains, but I know they are working on similar products. So for example, like Optimism has a super chain, which I believe is essentially trying to or will be trying to achieve a lot of the same goals where, okay, we have like we have I'm blanking on the name. Sorry, we have Base, we have Zora, like we have a couple of different optimistic L2s, and obviously like the same problems exist in that space where, okay, well, we have all of these L2s, like, but none of them can communicate with each other. So yeah, I don't know the exact details of like what it looks like technically, but I do imagine that the kind of the different spaces, like the optimistic L2s of the world, will kind of, at least if they aren't already, will start to work on these same solutions. The one I am a little familiar with is, like I said, the AVAX ecosystem, where you can kind of do the same thing across subnets, where it's almost the same concept, right? Where you have, okay, you can launch an L1 subnet with this kind of similar create your own chain system that Polygon CDK is, and then you can do these kind of cross-chain transactions within these different subnets. I don't know the technical details of how it works. I'm just saying, like, there are I guess comparable things across the broader ecosystem as well. It's not I guess the details of how it works and the benefits and the pros and cons of using zero knowledge proofs to actually achieve this and make it quick enough to be viable. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out with zero knowledge proofs. I think it is probably going to be a bit of an edge across the different competitors, I would say.
Yeah, I think they will move to like a ZK solution very soon. I think the optimistic like approach is something that was kind of like a short-term solution to make it possible, but at the end of the day, like everyone is saying that ZK is way better. So I do believe that it makes sense.